For me, this semester, it's come down to close your eyes and really think on this. How do you know when you're learning? What does that feel like? And I think so much of what we've done in education is really corrupted students' abilities to recognize when they're learning. There's been explicit teaching and learning around how do you know when you're learning. That's been huge, and that's been really hard.
Whenever you're documenting and reflecting, it takes the pressure off you, and it focuses instead of not the performance level, but like what you're doing at its simplest terms. For me, simplifying it to that has been life-changing, because if you're learning, it's not wrong. And I think that's the mindset kind of flip that needs to change.
Aloha and welcome to the Unrulr Podcast. In this conversation, we're talking to two incredible educators. One is Angela Stockman, who is an international education consultant and the author of seven books on education, documentation, and reflection. I also have the honor of being joined by Maggie Burns, a graduating senior at Daemon University and future educator. Thank you both so much for being here.
I'm really grateful to be here, Aaron. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
Me.
Definitely, Maggie. Angela, the first question I'm going to throw to you is I want you to talk about the power of documentation and why you're so passionate about it.
There are a lot of reasons, I think, why I'm really passionate about documentation, but the most important one is it has everything to do with the fact that this is my 31st year in the field of education. And I'm still as excited, if not more excited, about the work that I get to do in the field than I was when I started teaching. And in fact, I think that documentation has made me more at peace with the sorts of struggles that we encounter as educators in a way that I was not able really to know and understand and experience as a young educator. And so, the thing that matters most to me about documentation is that it's calming for me and it's centering for me. And it keeps me really curious and awestruck at any moment. And that's been really rewarding. It's prevented burnout.
I love that. And Maggie, you're a student of Angela's, who in many ways found your calling through her assessment methods class. Can you talk about the role that documentation and reflection played, and also the role of Angela in your own kind of journey and growth?
Yeah. I think documentation for me took the pressure off me. It made me look at moments, at circumstances, at situations that happen when you're a teacher. It took the pressure off me focusing on being perfect. And instead of focusing on not messing up, I'm focusing on learning instead. And I think when I document, I'm constantly trying to find a way to get better instead of constantly overanalyze the situation in a way that is detrimental to my, mental well-being, if that makes sense. And I think that I'm still used to calling her Angela, but Professor Stockman, or Angela, I think she was critical in reminding me and kind of bringing me down the earth, and kind of a mentor in the fact of how to best use the tool to help ground me and bring me back to what's important, which is learning and getting better. If that makes sense.
It makes a ton of sense. I think getting to see your journey as a documenter and as an educator, and you unpacking and almost like challenging what you were taught learning is supposed to be, your school is supposed to be, through your own documentation at a meta level has been super, super cool. And you talk about, being a college athlete, and you talk about, coming from this space where you had to be a perfectionist. how did like reflection and documentation and how did the work in Angela's class fight that? How did you kind of find yourself as a learner and educator?
I think it got to a point where I was just like, enough is enough. And it was getting to the point where I couldn't function like in a good way. I think at a high level, perform at a high level, whether it was in volleyball or in school, that like something needed to change. And
yeah,
I think that I learned about this tool in her class, and I saw how she used it, and I think burnout was a big part of why I wasn't performing at a high level in volleyball. And like she said, but it was just in a different context. I think it can prevent burnout, and it also can help you kind of dig yourself out of that as well. And when you're not performing well, whether it's in a sport or whether you feel like you're not performing well as a teacher, whatever that looks like in your context, I think it can be very disheartening.
Yeah.
And whenever you're documenting and reflecting, it takes, like I said before, it takes the pressure off you, and it focuses instead of not the performance level, but like what you're doing at its simplest terms. And like for me, simplifying it to that has been life-changing, because instead of focusing on, okay, my students need to pass the New York State Regents exams, I'm focusing on what can I do every single day to help them get a little bit better, and what am I doing to get better like along with them. And I'm able to see all of those things through documentation.
I love that.
I remember sort of when the light bulb came on for Maggie, and it doesn't for many students, because one of the things that's challenging for me, which is a total sidebar conversation that we can get into at some other point, is that when you're using Unrulr in a 15-week course and you only see your students once or twice a week, it can be really challenging to inspire students to get into a really good rhythm and gain traction with documentation. When they arrive there, it's almost like the semester is about to be over. I'm having the same experience right now. It's one of my stones in my shoe right now. But Maggie was just so very curious about documentation and committed to it that she kept documenting after our semester was over. And I remember you called me on my cell phone, I think it was, and you were coming out of practice, I think, and you were like, I think I understand what this can do now, and it's not about class, and it's all about this, and now I can, and I understand what documentation is, and I understand what I'm supposed to be paying attention to as a learner, and it's everywhere. I can't unsee this anymore. And that's when I knew that you had really reached a place where you had a deeper understanding of documentation with a capital D instead of the assignment, that someone's giving you in a class. It had become something that you owned, and it was really quite wonderful.
And I think that's a symbol of just like my overall involvement. I think I was focused on that grade and the outcome for so long, no matter what that looked like. And like, it was kind of like a life switch, I would say. I'm focused on the journey and the little things rather than the grade. And I think that also is a big part of why I am the way I'm trying not to be anymore, is because of grades in general.
Yeah.
So we can also talk about that for hours as well.
Tell me about that life switch.
I think that I remember that conversation, and I definitely talked exactly like that. I think the life switch was, like I said, focusing on the little things and doing like everything that I can to control the small things, and the big things will fall, and not necessarily in I getting an A+ or I'm doing good in volleyball, but in a way like I feel more fulfilled. I feel more confident, and I feel more secure in who I am.
Yeah, I think it was sort of noticeable as your teacher when there used to be an adrenaline hit, I think, that all of us experience if we're achievers, right? You complete the product, you please somebody, you gain their respect for a minute because you created something or performed in a way that was pleasing to them, right? And so there's this adrenaline hit, and it brings a lot of dopamine with it sometimes too, and it makes you feel really good.
Yeah.
And I started noticing myself, and then I know that we've talked about this too. You start to have that experience with the little learning moments instead. When you start realizing and noticing when you're learning something, and the learning starts to feel like the reward.
Yes.
It's sort of like, for me, it's almost like being on a scavenger hunt every day, no matter what I'm doing, because I'm committed to documenting my learning. And I've been practicing this for a while. I'm very attuned to when I'm learning. I know what that feels like in physically, what it feels like when I'm learning. I know and there are different sorts of translations of that for me in an embodied way. So when I feel that and I recognize that I'm learning something, I'm right away starting to take pictures. And I'm almost frustrated if I'm busy or in the middle of something that I don't have time to document it in a deeper way or to jot notes down, because I might even have an idea about it that I want to hold on to, and I'm afraid I'm going to lose it, right? But it really does, it's sort of like hunting for Easter eggs all day long now, right? I'm looking for the moment, and it's less about the product of the moment. The other thing, Erin, that we talk about all the time, and I'd love Maggie's perspective on this, because maybe it might be a new experience for her that you've really fostered, is it's also really wonderful to share it online. So if I did something where I learned something really awesome this morning, something happened in my assessment methods class, and I documented it, and I'm going to hang it together and throw it on social media probably tomorrow. And people in the field who are just as nerdy about that stuff as I am are going to say something to me about it. We're going to talk about it. And it's just, it pulls me into community with people around stuff that I'm really interested in that can be hard to find local company for, right? And it's just so sustaining to me. And I'm wondering, Maggie, because she'll tell you, I never pushed my students to make their posts global. We didn't do that, and navigating that is a little bit tricky. But then she established a relationship with you, and all of you are helping her make her thinking and her work more invisible online. And so how has that changed your relationship with documentation? I'm curious, because people have lots of ideas about people who like to hear themselves think on the internet.
I think that it's exciting, but for me, it's rewarding. It's scary because a lot of what I'm finding out about myself is very vulnerable and very personal. And it took a lot, there was a lot of hard, I don't want to say hard conversations between us, because it wasn't intense, but there were some intense, tough topics, if that makes sense, to get to where I'm at now. And not in a way where you were getting angry with me or anything. It was just intense, hard things to speak on, which is vulnerability, making mistakes and owning them, and then learning from them. And I think it's scary to share that with people online. And I think the best way I can put it is it's scary, but I think it's also contagious. I saw that with you, and I saw how it impacted me, and then a couple of my other peers, my classmates, my friends. And I was I think it kind of clicked one day, okay, after I published my first blog, and we had really good results. I remember Jack showing me the statistics on it, and I was oh, this makes a difference.
People are reading you.
Yeah, people are reading it.
People are interested in you.
Yes. And then it happened again.
Your work is public.
When I was the keynote speaker at the camp, the higher ed camp that you ran, and I spoke on basically the same thing as my blog post. It was just a speech instead of a blog post. And I was in front of a room full of professionals who are way more credible than me, have way more schooling than me, have years and years of experience, and I'm a college student who's getting ready to graduate. And again, like my experience is through volleyball and through my perfectionism in school. And when I got up there and I received such positive feedback that I did afterwards, and it was immediate because almost every single person in that room came up to me afterwards and said how wonderful it was and how relatable it was. And I was like, like this can make an impact. And like that, I think that was like the most, like the biggest, like, whoa, like I can really make a difference.
It was really fascinating for me to watch you ask a room full of higher education instructors to please be willing to make mistakes in front of your students. And I was really blown away by how well received that was.
Yeah, totally. And
I was really impressed by that. And it changed the tone and the vibe in the room.
And I think it led, sorry to interrupt, but I think it led to the type of conversations we had in the small group table afterwards. And like, I'm proud of that. Like you probably can tell, like I was a part of some really cool conversations, and
you instigated them.
I think it me being vulnerable in that way and sharing that story of my documentation and how it changed me and how making mistakes and admitting to them and owning to them and sharing them changed my life. I think it kind of like that was the first domino, and then it just kept going for the rest of the time. So,
Angela, what are you proud of in Maggie? What has Maggie taught you?
I'm proud of many things in Maggie. Mostly what I'm proud of is the ownership that she's claimed over this, and the fact that I think that it's all too common that young people in Maggie's position will sometimes identify instructors like me in a way where they'll put us on a pedestal, or they'll continue to turn to us for guidance on a really, really frequent or consistent basis. And there's no gradual release of the learning, of the responsibility, and also of the ownership of the work. And what I am most proud of is it's 8:00 at night and I get a text message that somebody has published a blog post, and on it is a framework for reflection. And I could take that right into my classroom the next day and use it with my students. And it was not my idea. And it saved me a ton of time and even lesson design that evening. And I had no idea it was coming. And that's what makes me really proud, is that Maggie is her own person inside of this work, making her own choices and really, I think, finding her own way. So I know that she's absolutely confident that the support that she's receiving and the place that she's finding for herself inside the field is something she earned on her own. It's not been something that's been manufactured for her. But it makes me really proud that I could stand in front of this semester's assessment methods students and say, hey, have a peek at this blog post if you're having a difficult time really working through how to document a learning moment and reflect on it well. This is Maggie, and she was my student last semester, and she came up with this frame that's way better than anything I ever came up with.
It's funny because one of my friends is in her class, in that class, and I didn't find this out until later because if you know him, that's just how he is. But he was like, "Oh yeah, your picture's on the board and everything," and I read your blog post. I was like, wow, like. Wow, like that's all I could say was wow, and like smile, and also just I think it goes along with kind of this whole conversation is documentation allows for you to like put together the little things that can make those big things. Like I would never have discovered that framework that she's talking about, the four questions to reflecting, unless I was able to go through all my reflections and find common themes, like go through that data and find common themes and then kind of turn it into something bigger than myself, I guess.
And I think that this is something that is unique for those of us that document our learning as well. And it's an experience that I had in writing my last book, is this ability to return to moments that happened long ago.
Yes.
And to be able and to place them beside moments that are happening now. And it's almost as if, wow, in that particular moment, way back when, this is what I was learning. But you can pull those images and that video and the reflection into some other completely different context. And you're still learning something from that documented moment. You're still learning something now based on a moment that happened for me 15 years ago. And I'm still learning from those students that taught me something then in a completely different context. And now I'm revisiting that moment in the present, and I'm bumping it up against documentation work that's going on right now. And I'm learning something completely different from that same group of kids. And I just have to say, like, it is incredibly moving to be at this place that I'm in my career and realize that those moments are not lost. That is not necessarily the past. The past is still very much present because of documentation. You know, I'm picking up an image I took in 2008 and I am pinning it on a wall next to something that happened in class yesterday and sharing it on Unrulr, and someone's giving me, you know, perspective on it. And in a way, it's almost like bringing the students that I have this year into community with the students that I had in 2008. And it's amazing. It really is.
Can you kind of give me the story arc, Angela, of finding out about Unrulr, using it, and then kind of where it led you to now?
I discovered Unrulr, I think, either because of Dan Ryder or Gary Height. Through LinkedIn. They knew I had been documenting and sharing my learning online for a very long time. And using a variety of different tools to do that. I had also made several study tours in Reggio Emilia, Italy, where documentation, that's the birthplace of it all, right? And it's a very different animal than it is here in our Western world. But so they knew of my interest in that, and they were the ones that introduced me to you. And the platform, the tool, just functions a bit differently and in all the right ways for work with older and more sophisticated learners. And so I think what was really wonderful for me is that in the Reggio world, documentation is often studied through an early childhood lens. And so much of my work has been about bringing the best of that and loose parts play into middle school and high school and university level contexts. But I didn't have a tool for it that was sophisticated enough and elegant enough for college students to want to use and have it feel sort of intuitive to what they do. And so I began using Unrulr for all of those reasons. And some of the features that you have there allow for me to do some really good formative assessment work. The ability to use those cogs as well is giving me some real-time feedback that's been really important. Yeah. So that's how I came to know of the tool, and the reasons why I started using it is you've really done such a beautiful job of creating something that's useful for people who are adult learners. And what a way to honor all of us, really, because I don't think that we've done that enough, not just in the field of education, but in general, in the world. Learning has always been the domain of children. And when we talk about it through an adult context, it suddenly gets turned into, well, what was the product of your learning and how was it valuable to someone? So for you to create something like Unrulr that is a more sophisticated sort of place where we can focus on our learning is just a deeply respectful way to honor those of us that are not just about the product. And
I love that. I mean,
the cultural implications of that are huge.
They really are. And I think if Will Rapoon, co-founder and CEO, was on this call, he would say it's about amplifying the work of you and other amazing adult, teenage, and child educators, and would deflect that praise and throw it right back. I mean, I think like it's a story catching tool for us, but it's also a place to amplify and make a lot of your work, I don't know, even more feasible. You wrote this incredible book. There's two books. There's really two books that have changed the way I think about education. One is this one by you. The other is by Carlos Moreno, who I actually interviewed yesterday around kind of leadership and leadership soul. This book, its title is for a specific audience, but it goes so much farther than that. The title is The Writing Teacher's Guide to Pedagogical Documentation. This book is not just for educators, it's for parents as well. It's not just for writing teachers, it's for any educator. Oh, 100%. And the way, one, you're a pretty damn good writer. Maggie follows in your suit. But the way you're able to showcase the power of documentation and reflection as like a foundational or the foundational skill for learners, and the way that documentation transforms learning from passive to active was really, really moving. Can you talk about like the key points of this book and what you're trying to get across?
I think I wrote that book because for so many years, people had asked me to coach them around documentation, and I would get tongue-tied because it's complicated. How do you take that work and make it tangible and practical?
Totally.
And then I had this thought that came to mind, the metaphor of the kaleidoscope, gave me an entry point into trying to make it a tangible and practical sort of model for people to work with. When I was coaching documentation projects in my writing studio, one of the things that we always talked about is that there are so many false starts with documentation, that you think you're going to go into a situation and document for one thing, and it ends up being something else entirely. And then sometimes you feel like a failure. And I think part of becoming someone who commits to documenting their learning is making your peace with the fact that it's like a kaleidoscope, that you sort of, aim it and structure it for this straight on view. And then you walk into your classroom and a kid hits your elbow and the whole thing goes tumbling. And from that moment forward, you're having to like kind of readjust and refocus. And I think that skill in and of itself is something that becomes intuitive the more that you practice documentation, that you don't get rattled or thrown off because the thing that you planned to document for didn't happen, or it wasn't quite as meaningful as you thought it would be. You become more aware of what else you could be focusing on and how to refocus that kaleidoscope. So I wrote the book because I wanted teachers to have a framework for how they might begin documenting their own learning in small ways that are really meaningful, and then how they might actually sustain a documentation project. One of the things that I was really lacking and had to come up with on my own as a documentarian were really good questions to sort of chase, great reflection questions and lenses to apply as I was practicing documentation. So I wanted to give people a book that they don't have to read cover to cover, but that they can use to understand what documentation is, and then really make some choices around how they want to use it in their own lives and for their own purposes. And so that was the inspiration behind that book.
Well, I think you crushed it. And you had these TLDRs at the end of each chapter. You just totally understand a 2024 audience. It was just this.
I wrote it during COVID.
I mean, it was the perfect. It was this total encapsulation. This is a book that you can implement really quickly in your practice. It's also something that you can sit on. I've read it 3 times.
Oh my goodness!
It's something that like I go back to when I think about what we're doing. Maggie right now is an intern at Unrulr and is helping us create these incredible Angela Stockman-esque like guides, curriculum and lesson plans around documentation, culture.
So she's building my curriculum for assessment methods in education.
100%. She's doing it. She's doing it. I mean, she's doing it in these really easy, bite-sized ways. So if you're using Unrulr, now you understand really how to use it at an incredible level. And even if you're not using Unrulr, you have these really great guides on reflection.
I think it's so necessary and it's going to be so helpful. Otherwise, it just becomes this ethereal thing that we talk in very mystical ways about, and we can't let it be that.
Totally. Like people always freak out about the word rigor. I love the word rigor. It just has to be applied to something outside of, teaching for a test. Maggie,
you just can't weaponize it.
Totally. You just can't weaponize it.
I want to add before we move on that I think when I came to her to kind of start this, I guess, journey, it was started off kind of, we were in class, and then afterwards I needed to be eligible for volleyball, and I wanted to be useful, take a useful class. So I did an independent study, but it turned into so much more than that. I came to her and I knew I wanted to do this. And obviously I had an interest in it, but I think one of my first questions was, how do I do it? And am I doing this wrong? And I think that was something that I really struggled with was I think a lot of people do, and it's a misconception. And she kind of hit on this already, but there's such a misconception. There's not a wrong way. And when you get those bumps in when you're looking through your kaleidoscope, it's not wrong. And it's not wrong to kind of like think you're going one way and then go another. And I think that's kind of what I learned the most about this, because it's so complex. That makes not really a wrong way to do it, because if you're learning, it's not wrong. And I think that's the mindset kind of flip that needs to change. Is it's not like a yes or no, or it's not an A or a B or a C. It's are you learning, or are you getting something out of this so you can change next time? Because there's not really the same path. The way I do it isn't the same way either of you do it. The way that you do it isn't the same way. Like, and it goes on and on and on. And I think that was like a big thing for me. Is I was like almost trying to fit a square peg in a round hole type thing. Like I was trying to do it. I wanted to be exactly like Professor Stockman, and like I'm me. Like I'm not gonna do it the same way, and that's okay.
Right. I think you're raising this is such a huge point, and it's something of a personal thorn in my side in the field of education right now in general, is that we tend to want rules to follow, and we want a lot of certainty. And in my early work with pedagogical documentation, there were many people who would suggest, well, it's this 5 or 7 or 11 step process, and you do it in this order, and you have to hyper plan. And mostly, and this was something that I grappled with this a lot as I was writing my book. It's about the kids. It's always about the students documenting their learning. And it is, but you know what? It's also about teachers being able to document their learning separately from the students. It's about us too, because documentation is such a deeply rewarding and I think in some ways very healing process and sustaining process. And it's not just about children documenting their learning. So originally my proposal for Routledge, the third part of the book, was going to be all about documenting with your students. And then I got into writing it, and I'm like, no, this one's just for the teachers, and they deserve to document. They deserve to reap the full rewards of documenting their own learning. And yeah, they can do it in service to students, but also it can be in service to bigger dreams and bigger visions and learning that's going to last beyond. One of the things that was so hard for me, and it still is I have a really hard time with the end of the school year or the end of a semester, because your students leave and you stay where they found you. And so documentation is a way of reminding ourselves also that we have learning to do that is greater than the context of this school year, this role that I'm in, this position that I'm in. I am more than my title and the institution I work for. And my documentation and learning is going to continue even after this class moves on. I have more to learn from the next around things that really matter to me and I'm bigger than this school year. And I think teachers deserve to understand and appreciate and be elevated by that. And documentation can do that.
There's levels to documentation. And getting learners to document in that like center of the onion as you're unpeeling it, getting past surface level is really curse word hard.
It really is. And I'm still
part of your culture. There's unlearning that has to occur.
You have to know when you're learning. That's been the biggest thing for me this semester is when people are throwing stuff into Unrulr. Like I have sometimes some students will just put like, memes in there. It wasn't a learning moment. They're reacting to something that they saw on the internet that was funny or that was representative of a learning moment. But it really, for me this semester, it's come down to close your eyes and really think on this. How do you know when you're learning? What does that feel like? And I think so much of what we've done in education is really corrupted students' abilities to recognize when they're learning. Yeah. It's just been about getting it done and getting an A. And so there's been explicit teaching and learning around how do you know when you're learning. That's been huge. And that's been really hard.
Maggie, this is a part of the podcast where someone who's listening, whether they're a teacher or a student or a learner, head of school, or early teacher, or late teacher, where you give them some really clear advice on how to create a culture where this is possible, where you can get to levels of reflection, or where you can craft moments or assignments or prompts that get them there. Can you give that person, that archetype, some guidance? And then Angela, can you build off of what Maggie says?
Yeah. My first thought when you said this was, we kind of talked about it earlier, but if you are vulnerable and you are doing this with them, keyword with, it's not like, okay, you're going to go home and do this, and this. We're going to do it together, and I'm going to show you, and I'm going to show you my thinking, my learning. Okay. Can you do that? But can you think for your, not say think for yourself, but can we do it in a way that's both parties are being vulnerable, and it's not, you do this, I grade it, I give it back to you.
Yeah. The power needs to be distributed the right way.
And it needs to be something that you go back to. It's not you look at it once and then it's done.
And I think that's so important because otherwise I think that we run the risk. One of the unintended consequences of documentation in the absence of a conversation about humility and vulnerability, I think it's essential. Yeah. We run the risk of this becoming a process by which we document learning to identify deficits in students. And it just becomes one more tool for evaluation. And I think Maggie will probably remember this. There was a tipping point in her assessment methods class where I came into class and I just started talking about documentation in terms of how it sustained my energy and it prevented me from burning out. And I was really honest with my students. And I said, it's really difficult to be a teacher and you are going to feel very disillusioned at times and it's going to break your heart. And I'm not asking you to document your learning so that you can go into your own classroom someday and take pictures of how kids are spelling words so that you can give them grades. That's not what this is. It's not about documenting what's happening in a guided reading group so that you can make an evaluation about what's wrong with students so that you can fix them. That's not what this is. And I think I almost wonder, I've never played with it this way before. I've never thought about it this way before. It's just coming up in this conversation. But I wonder how essential maintaining a humble and a vulnerable posture is to ensuring that documentation doesn't just become evaluation.
Maggie, what are prompts? What are questions that, or a series of them that make it easier for a learner to get to different levels of reflection?
To put away the fear, first off, you got to put away the fear of judgment. I think, how can you put away the fear of judgment so you can be honest with yourself and how you felt in that moment? I think there's a lot of power to realizing how you feel in a learning moment, because oftentimes I feel like in a learning moment, if you're happy, if you're sad, if you're angry, whatever the case may be, that's going to affect how you act. If you're angry, you might act in a way that you don't like. If you're happy, you may not see like something else was happening that you didn't even realize because you were on cloud nine. I think putting aside the fear of judgment or even fear of being wrong and like truly figuring out how you feel and maybe why will go a long way. And I think a lot of times people don't want to be honest with themselves after something happens. And oftentimes I think learning happens when it's not going great or it's something kind of went wrong. And again, if you only look at it in a surface level, like I'm a surface level way, I don't think that much learning will happen. But if you're able to put aside the fear, I think, and identify what's going on internally, I think learning will happen.
I love that. Maggie, this question's for both of you, but maybe Maggie first. What's your why for Unrulr? Why are you giving us so much time? Why are you interning? Why did the tool impact you or open up new ways of learning? And then Angela, I'd love for you to build off of that and kind of answer it too.
Unrulr has given me a way to help others. I don't want to use the word achieve, but kind of flip the switch that I did. I think, like I said, it was a life-altering kind of mindset change for me. And I have reaped the benefits of the positive flip of the switch. I am so fulfilled with what I'm doing. And I think because I'm not fighting for success or for achievements or for high performance or for a trophy or whatever the case may be, whatever the word you want to put it at the end. I'm not striving for perfection, for whatever. Because I'm not striving for that, and I'm striving just to try to be a good human being who learns along the way. If I can like help others get to that point, even just 2 people, like I know how it feels and that it's amazing. So I hope some other people can get there. So yeah.
I get the
Angela, for you, what is the kind of why behind your usage of Unrulr and kind of what it's made more possible in your own practice?
I think that getting to know you and watching how your organization moves in the world initially, I was very certain going into my relationship with you that you were all good people doing good work for the right reasons. I've also, dealt with you on the business end of this. And I've watched how important it is to you in the organization, that it's really about bringing the tool to people in order to change cultures.
Yeah.
And in order to feed those cultures in ways that are really positive. So for me, it's not as much about the tool. The tool is fabulous, but it is about the cultural shifts that you are really being very intentional about creating through the tool, but also around it too. You all walk your talk, and that is not always the case with entrepreneurs and vendors and people who have a tool to sell, right? I'm very confident that anyone who gets into relationship with you around the use of Unrulr is going to find that what I'm saying here is true. And it really is very obvious in every single exchange that I have with all of you that it is about cultural shift. And it's the kind of cultural shifts that really are legacy work for me. So that's why you are in alignment with the vision that I have. And life is short, and this is the difference I want to make.
I'm so grateful for both of your time and brilliance. I can't wait to keep working with you. And
I'm just grateful to always have the opportunity to reflect this way with you and with Maggie too, because they're, it's good to find your people who ask good questions that deepen the learning. So thank you, Aaron.
Angela, where can people find you? Where can they get this book? Where can they follow your work? Because your work is dope.
The book was published by Routledge. It is the Writing Teacher's Guide to Pedagogical Documentation, Rethinking the Way We Assess Learners and Learning. It's available everywhere you buy books, including Routledge directly, and I think it's on sale right now too. I am on Twitter, I am on LinkedIn, and I am on Instagram. And I'm Angela Stockman everywhere, but on Instagram, I'm Angela Make Writing.
And Maggie, where can people find you?
See, this is something that I'm still working on. I'm trying to find the right tool that I'm trying to find the right tool where I feel like is a good space for, I guess, this kind of work. And I see the way Professor Stockman's doing it with Instagram.
I'm old.
I know. I
don't want to do it the way I'm doing it. I'm old. Maybe I'll do it a different way, and then I'll watch you. And I'll learn from you.
This has been something that I've been grappling with. I don't know. I want to put it out there in some way, and I maybe LinkedIn is the proper. I have a LinkedIn. It's Maggie Burns.
I think so.
So I need to start.
You can
consistently. So.
You can find Maggie all over Unrulr's website. You can find the blog articles that she writes. You can find
her comments on my Instagram. Yeah.
So, I mean, Maggie has a really awesome explanation of who she is and what she does here. And you can find us on YouTube. You can find us at unrulr.com. And, please like, subscribe, but way more importantly, share this. Share this with people in your life who are documenters, who want to grow in that skill. Share this with people that want to shift the cultures of their institution and schools. And just whatever you do, follow up with these two incredible human beings and learn as much as you can from them. Thank you so much for being here.